So hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Business Model Innovation. Just before we begin, let's go through some technical items. First of all, you should be hearing us right now, and if you can't hear us that well through your computer, we'd like to point out that there is also an option to listen to us through the telephone. So all you should do is look at the dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen, and you will see a phone number to dial in and contact and join the webinar. And if throughout the webinar you have any technical difficulty, we've put up here the phone number of the technical support. Please also notice that you are all muted. We have a very large number of attendees here today, and thank you all for joining. But due to the limited amount of time and the number of participants, we won't be able to conduct a conversation or switch control of the mic. But we will be very happy to provide you at the end of the webinar with our contact details, and any further questions or comments or feedbacks that you may have at the end of the webinar, we will be delighted if you send them to the address we'll provide at the end of the webinar. And if all that is okay with you, I think we can start our webinar. So let's introduce ourselves. My name is Alon Harris. I'm an account manager and innovation facilitator here at SIT, and with me is my good colleague Yoni. Hi, Yoni.
Hi, Alon.
And Yoni, as you can see, is a VP Global Business Development and a very senior innovation facilitator here at SIT. Now, we put up this picture, I think, Yoni, because we don't want our guests around the world to feel that we're giving them a lecture and this is a course in the university. We want it to be a bit more casual. So
you can see I have my coffee right here.
Yeah, I've got mine too, but cheers. So we want this to be a very casual and convenient conversation about business model innovation. And we hope that you overseas are laying back and sitting back and enjoying the ride as well as much as we are. I really wish we had these star-shaped donuts, but that's the next webinar. Okay, I'll get those.
Are they filled with jelly?
I don't. There's one way to find out, but you need to give me a few more days to find out where I can buy them. So what are we going to talk about today? The first thing we'll have to try and define is what exactly is business model innovation. We're going to show some examples of innovative business models that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We're going to try to analyze these business models through the spectacles, through the prism of the systematic inventive thinking method and principle. We're going to use SIT's approach to proactively innovate in business models, and we're going to summarize, and we can already tell you that in our summary we're going to try and provide you with some guidance to some actions you can take immediately after this webinar to start thinking differently about your current business model. So stay tuned, there's some homework at the end. So let's look at this definition of a business model. I'm sure there are many, but we're going to use this one throughout this webinar. So a business model is how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. And now we're going to try and weld to this definition our definition of innovation, which is thinking and acting differently in a beneficial and feasible way. So the combined definitions of business model and innovation should look something like this. On the left-hand side, the way we create, deliver, and capture value, and on the right-hand side, the way we think and act in new ways, in different ways, to create value for our company and our customers, and ways that are both beneficial, of course, and feasible. And you would expect that it would be very straightforward, looking at this screen, that we'd immediately understand what business model innovation is. But to tell you the truth, Yoni, I think we've heard this from our friends around the world. It's kind of a fuzzy definition, or everybody's using it in different ways. Everybody seems to like the notion of business model innovation, but don't necessarily know how to approach it or where to even begin. So,
and even if we do try to combine these two sentences, it will create some sort of long and unwieldy sentence like thinking and implementing how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value in a new and different way.
You try putting that on a slide to management, and I'm sure there'll be a benefit. So we're going to try and go about this in a different way. So Yoni, the title of this slide is From Innovative Business Models to business model innovation, we have 3 examples on this slide. Well, what can you tell me about this slide?
Well, I think, Alon, one of the important things and interesting things, especially for those of you who have participated in webinars by SAT before, you understand that our approach oftentimes to create definitions is kind of reverse engineering, trying to understand some examples of where innovative business models were created and trying to learn from those how we might be able to define what an innovative business model is. And so I think that these 3 things on the slide are good examples of what we hear oftentimes when we talk with people in organizations around the world for examples, and we ask them for examples of what can be considered an innovative business model. So I think that Amazon Kindle, Groupon, and Nespresso could be used as examples and demonstrations for what innovative business models are. And maybe to just give a bit of detail around why people typically think that these are innovative business models, we can start perhaps with Groupon. So for those of you who are familiar with Groupon, and I think that many of you probably are because it's quite a successful, relatively new company, about 5 years old, but it has already expanded to 500 different markets in 44 countries. So you might have a Groupon right around the corner from you or in your computer. I was telling Alon before that I get spams from Groupon all the time. But what's innovative about Groupon and the fact that it is successful is that it actually took the coupon market and converted it into an assurance contract. So rather than just getting a coupon and saying, okay, you can get this amount of money off, you can save this amount of money from purchasing something, it actually changed the rules of what a coupon can or should be. For example, what do I mean by an assurance contract? If a certain number of people sign up for an offer, for whatever they're offering, then the deal becomes available to everybody. But if the predetermined minimum number of people don't sign up, then the coupon is invalid. It doesn't exist. And therefore, people can't actually buy the product for the reduced price. What's innovative, I think, business model-wise, is if we look at different stakeholders, it has a different influence on so many people, and that's why it's become so attractive. So from the point of view of retailers, this really reduces their risk. And they can treat coupons as quantity discounts as well as sales promotion tools. And unlike the typical classified advertising, the merchant, the retailer, does not pay any upfront cost in order to participate. So it's really attractive to them. Groupon had to make money off of it, otherwise they would have never come out with such a thing. And they make money by keeping approximately half of the money that the customer pays. For example, if we have this $30 chocolate trip where you can take a tour of and get your individual chocolates, it would normally cost $30, but the consumer is offered to purchase this trip for $15. And then Groupon and the retailer would split those $15 50-50, so each one would get about $7.50. So Groupon's making a nice profit on this. The customer, of course, benefits from lower prices, and the entire operating model had to be innovated because group discounts, although group discounts have really existed for a very long time, they were always for an organized group. You always predetermine the group in advance. And here it's open to the public, so anyone can join up into a group and benefit from this bulk discount. So I think that's what's innovative about Groupon. Now, if we look at Amazon, of course, Amazon, one of the reasons why it was successful starting up as Amazon before it came out with the Kindle was also a business model innovation where they decided not to hold any stock of their books. And therefore, they didn't have to pay for warehouse pricing or warehouse costs or anything like that. It was an on-demand business model. Now, when they wanted to expand, and of course there's always a need to expand in a competitive market, they came out with the Amazon Kindle. And the Kindle was, once again, another demonstration of innovative business model. Why is that? Because, as people tell us, it was moving from software to actually a physical platform for ebooks. So although they were able to position themselves long ago as a supplier of ebooks, now they're actually providing the physical platform. By doing so, it allowed them to actually become a publishing house. So Amazon nowadays lets authors self-publish books on the Kindle platform. It earns money because it keeps 30% of the price at which the book is sold. And some authors, of course the authors have to benefit, some authors have already become millionaires by sidestepping traditional publishers and selling smaller books for lower prices but high volume. For existing books that use the typical ebook system, the publishers set the prices of ebooks and Amazon gets a commission. So that's another good income through the Kindle. And finally, they've created an entire network around Kindle advertising. So Amazon currently uses the platform to advertise its own products from the rest of its range and should be able to generate much profit from it in the long term for two simple reasons. One, it has a monopoly over the ads, and two, it has so much information about Kindle users that the advertisements are very targeted to exactly who wants them and who can use them. I think the third and final example that we'll just talk about is Nespresso by Nestle. Nespresso invented and patented a unique technology for making quality coffee at home. It's a machine that brews espresso from coffee capsules containing ground coffee. So first, in business model innovation, it offered a new value proposition. It's easy to use technology that offers great quality espresso at home. But secondly, it introduced new channels of distribution to the clients, passing the supermarket channels and reaching the customer directly. This is done through three different channels that they innovated. One, the e-commerce platform, buying on the internet. Two, a global network of exclusive boutiques. And three, customer relationship centers, or what they call Nespresso Members Club. And using their Members Club, they get to know their clients personally. And that's helping them combat the generics nowadays with the capsules. And actually, now that I think of it, those three examples are really interesting examples because they each portray that no matter what type of organization you are, you can do business model innovation. So if you're a software company like Amazon and you're in a new industry of ebooks, you can help break into tangible products through that new industry through a new business model. But if you're like Nestle and you're a well-established company creating a new business model, you can use technological innovation. And if you're a startup company like Groupon entering an age-old industry of coupons, an innovative business model helps you position yourself really strongly in that market.
And I guess what's also interesting about these three stories is that they still have the challenge of continuing reinventing their business model as time goes by, as the market conditions change. So, for example, Nestle, their patent is now over and done, right, with these capsules.
Sure, yeah.
And now they have to create the next stage of their business model has to be updated. And in Groupon, obviously facing fierce competition from many different directions over the past year or two, now have to update themselves too. So it's not a one-off attempt. It's something that has to be invested in over time and have some sort of a pipeline of a business model approach or an evolution.
Exactly. So like much innovation, a pipeline might be a key word here, even for business models.
So, you know, Yoni, I was listening to these stories, and there were so many elements that came up. We heard of channels of distribution, of promotion, of pricing models, of different activities these companies are focusing on when they reinvent their business model. And I put some of them on a slide here so that we can just take a look at what consists, when we talk about business world, what the closed world of these business models includes. Can you tell us a bit about, for those of our the people on our webinar that have not heard the term closed world before, a bit about what it is and how it connects to our approach, and why would it be beneficial to make this list of elements on the left-hand side?
Okay, so the closed world basically tells us what elements we want to take into account when thinking of innovative ideas. So rather than thinking of what we don't have and what we can innovate and create completely new into our organization or into our product, or wherever it is we want to think about, the closed world actually directs us to say, don't think of new things, but think of existing things and how you can use them in new ways. And so it's really important to create this inventory of elements and resources that are in our closed world so that we know what are the elements we have in order to use in order to generate the business, the innovations and the innovative business models. So it's not just a checklist of things that we want to keep in mind when building a business model, but it's things that we can tap into as a source for developing that innovative business model afterwards.
So basically, if I understand, we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. We're looking at what we currently have within our business model and attempting to explore all of these elements within our box. Yeah.
And that's exactly right. So I like that visual of the box because it helps understand what goes into the box, and then we have to innovate inside the box rather than looking and taking all those elements outside the box and creating completely new things.
Well, but you know, Yoli, when we talk about business models, it sounds so big and complex. I mean, do you have to innovate every single thing on that list we just saw? Or, I mean, how do you overcome the complexity of so many different elements that are interconnected and intertwined? And eventually, how do you come up with alternative models and create these models so that they're not just nice alternatives, but very strong and powerful and impactful in terms of differentiation and their ability to drive revenue? So there are a lot of questions hovering over this topic.
And they're great questions, but in order to answer those, perhaps I'll just say one thing that several of you probably remember about SAT. It's about getting started. So it's not dealing with so much around the complexity of the question and trying to analyze all those elements and trying to decide where to start, but it's let's get started and see where things go and see what we can learn from them and how we can develop business models out of them. So it's like it's an exploration. You don't necessarily know where you're going to get to, but you know where you start your journey. That's right. I mean, you know that you're going to get to an innovative business model, but it doesn't really matter exactly what point you start from. Just get started.
Okay. So let's hear a story about the how. Okay. Okay. So I know this story is close to your heart.
Yeah, it's close to my heart because I was one of the facilitators on this project. I think it was several years ago, actually a decade ago, more than a decade ago.
No comment. No comment on my side.
And those of you who have participated in previous webinars are probably familiar with our Sedation example. And you're probably familiar with the example because we use it sometimes to demonstrate productivity and sometimes around product development. And I think that that's exactly why it's a great example of business model innovation. Because it touches on so many different innovations, the combined impact was actually a business model. And so the Sedation system is a product in innovation from Johnson & Johnson. The idea was to create an automatic system, an automated system, to provide anesthesia for certain types of medical procedures. And they were stuck in a situation where, although they were able to develop and create such a system, they didn't have a business model around it. They couldn't create what the benefit or what the value, how they can capture the value out of this. So it was clear what the value would be to the healthcare professionals and what the value would be to the patients, but they couldn't understand how to monetize it and create the value for themselves. And so the innovation work actually resulted in an innovative business model. The result of this project was coming to the realization that whatever innovations were done on the product itself actually led to increased throughput. Increased throughput means that a doctor could see 2 to 3 more patients per day. By doing so, they tapped into an insight and understanding that the value that they can ask for is some percentage of those 2 to 3 more patients per day, and not the actual nuts and bolts of the system that they were trying to sell. So it's not about the equipment, it's not about the disposable, as we're all familiar with different business models in different industries around the razor blade and the razor business model, or the printer and the ink cartridge business model. But here, they're not even actually selling the nuts and bolts at all. They're giving them away and selling the time savings and the additional patient care that surgeons are able to provide.
So it sounds like there was a ripple effect where you start by triggering or manipulating one part of the product design and ending up through this iterative process of exploration, finding an opportunity to create value for your customers and cash that value.
You know, that's an excellent point, because I think that if we want to walk through it a bit about what the process was and how we got to that, I think that we can learn a lot of things along the way.
So shall we go back in time a decade ago? I can hear the violin and everything's turning into a black and white movie, and Yoni has a bit more hair on his head. But let's understand what process you underwent back then a decade ago. Tell me about this book, and specifically about Ronald Fink.
Oh, so function follows form, as you see on the slide, is a term that was coined by Fink, Ward, and Smith in a book called Creative Cognition. And they came to a really interesting insight by doing several researches in the field of cognitive psychology. Their insight was that people are much better at finding what function a new thing, or even an abstract design, can provide, rather than thinking about what they're trying to develop, for what reasons, and then trying to create a form that provides that. So it was actually a breakthrough identification or insight, because the world up to that point had strongly believed, and still does to many, in many cases, the Bauhaus explanation of design and innovation, that first we have to identify the use or the need, and only then develop the form that can provide that need in the best way possible. In Bauhaus, it's called form follows function. What Fink, Ward, and Smith did is that they identified that it's not true, that people, human brains, from a cognitive psychology perspective, human brains are much better at figuring out the function for a form than figuring out the best form once you identify the function.
And you know, this principle that, and fascinating phenomenon that they found regarding the way we think has been translated at SIT into an actual cognitive workflow, meaning that it's a process that requires your brain, basically, to follow a series of steps in a very disciplined and regulated fashion in order to challenge assumptions and generate brand new forms and new functionalities. So for those of you who are not familiar with the function follows form workflow, I'm going to quickly introduce it. Basically, the first 3 steps are absolutely technical. They require absolutely no creativity, but they are the groundwork. They're the condition for later being able to create that creative leap and generate some really fascinating ideas. So we start off with an existing situation. If this is, if you're focusing on something that's tangible, like a product, then we'd like to see its nuts and bolts, building on your metaphor before. But it can also be something intangible, like a process or a business model, which by definition is some sort of a design, a flow, relationship between different elements. And the conditions for us to describe the existing situation is that we must describe it through its components. Whatever it is, we must break it into smaller components to provide us with a richer starting point to be able to then conduct the next stage. The next stage requires us to manipulate and create disorder. We usually think of disorder as something negative, but in this situation, in this workflow, creating the disorder is creating an opportunity for us to explore uncharted territories, to consider new designs and new possibilities for whatever we're focusing on. And these manipulations are conducted via 5 different thinking tools or templates that are at the heart of the SIT methodology. We won't go into this currently, and if you're interested, we have more materials we'll be happy to send you later, but just know that what these are basically are instructions, how to manipulate that starting point, how to impact the components, the stages, the parts of the puzzle to create something that is virtual, some sort of a situation that's been reorganized, and usually the reaction is at this point is like you can see on this slide up here. It usually is bizarre. It might be perceived as broken. Your first reaction might be to burst out in laughter and think that it's a crazy, crazy new order of a process that works so well, and why change it, or a business model that doesn't make any sense. And if this is your initial reaction, you must know that you're in a very good place and you're following the instructions perfectly, because it's this sense of surprise and this ambiguity that forces your brain to think in directions it wouldn't have considered earlier on. And this is the technical part of the workflow. Until now, all we've been focused on is the form, the components and the way they're arranged, or their functionalities, or their relationships. Now the fun begins. Now the question is, looking at this virtual product, looking at this manipulated existing situation, can I create some sense in this situation? Would this actually be a good arrangement to consider? What would be the benefits? So we ask ourselves, should we? We try to delve into who would be excited about this idea? Who would think that this is worthwhile investing in? Would this, if we're talking about business model, would this drive revenue? Would it drive traffic into our stores? Would this increase margins? Would this change the low seasons and create a peak in sales? Would this be able to enable us to enter new markets, to tailor needs that were unmet till now, to approach new market segments? So the benefits we're looking for from multiple points of view, and I think as you mentioned, Yoni, in the examples you gave at the beginning of Nestle and Groupon and Kindle, one of the beautiful things were that there was a win-win-win-win-win-win-win situation where there was something valuable for each key stakeholder in the situation, and this is what we're exploring at the benefits stage. Now, we need to be very realistic. Not everything has a benefit. Not every idea is a good idea, so be very candid with yourself, because we live in the real world. We're looking for things that are going to be really valuable and not just sound awkward or gimmicky. The second question we ask, and this is where we're applying our critical thinking, our scrutiny, and our years of expertise, is can we do it? Is it feasible? For example, if we want to change our business model and the regulator will not allow it because it's just against regulation, this might be a path not worth investing in. Perhaps the change in the business model will require building a totally different IT system for your distribution, or perhaps it might harm your brand, which for many, many years you've been investing in. So from multiple points of view, we need to think of the feasibility of this new potential business model. And what's important for us, while thinking of the budget we have, the time we have, the manpower or intellectual property, is not to just give in at this point if the challenges sound too high or too complicated. There is a stage for adaptations in which we try and maintain those wonderful benefits we got excited about in the beginning and try to mitigate those challenges and those feasibility hurdles to try and create something that can still survive and live, maybe in a different shape or a different version, but still maintain those benefits. And only after this, at the end of this workflow, do we reach an idea. So first we focus on the components and their rearrangement through a system of manipulation, and then we focus on the functionality while applying these several filters to ensure that we are evaluating these ideas as they are born, so to say. So this is the process you used at Johnson & Johnson, right?
Yeah, actually, that's thanks, Alon, for reminding us of that, because I think that'll help us understand better that example of the Sedation system and see how we can develop innovative business models through actually working through the function follows form principle.
Oh, I'm sitting back and taking on that journey.
So if we all remember that the existing situation is the first stage of function follows form, so the first thing you want to map out, if we look at a product like the Sedation system, are some of the components. Now, it's interesting because if you remember, we talked about the challenge around the Sedation system was a commercial challenge. They couldn't figure out how to make the business model work, and yet we decided to approach it from a product perspective. How do we innovate the product so that the business model will work? Which isn't necessarily the most obvious approach, but using SAT, it's really important to have as much as possible tangibility. So when we get started, let's try to identify what our existing resources, our existing situation really is, that closed world that we talked about. And so we decided to start from the product itself and map out the closed world. The next stage was the subtraction, was the manipulation. So we tried to identify what would happen if we subtracted some of the essential elements. One of the elements was the backup battery. Now, the backup battery provided backup power in case of a power outage, and you want to have anesthesia in the case of a power outage, because without anesthesia in the middle of a surgical procedure, you could run into some trouble, and then it would be a lose-lose situation for so many people. So the obvious benefits of this all was that the system could be much smaller, and less costly because you don't have to maintain a backup battery, and the backup battery took up a lot of space. And so the benefits were quite obvious. The challenges, of course, as we mentioned, were quite big. So the question is, how do we make this work? How can we make adaptations to retain these benefits and overcome the challenges? And the idea that came up was, rather than developing and implementing and putting a backup battery into the system, why don't we take it away and connect the system to other backup batteries that exist within the operating room itself? Once again, looking at the closed world of the entire system. And here it was connected, the idea came up to connect it to the defibrillator, to the crash cart, which had its own backup battery. And so they were able to take away from the product itself the backup battery and just connect the system to the defibrillator. But that wasn't enough. Through the process, it's an iterative process, as Alon mentioned, and we subtracted not only the backup battery, but the screen also. By subtracting the screen, some of the benefits were also a much smaller space, and the idea was maybe we can connect that screen, instead of having a screen dedicated on the machine itself, let's connect the anesthesia machine to a screen that already exists within the operating room. And the screen that existed in the operating room is the screen that the surgeon was looking at anyway doing the procedure for colonoscopy, and then all the vital information that would normally have to be on a dedicated screen could be projected onto that screen. So the result was that we could actually identify a much smaller product, and because of that, we could imagine a product that didn't have to sit in the operating room and could be connected to pieces that were before in the pre-op room and in the post-op room, with a very small machine taking up the footprint, the space itself in the operating room. What that allowed the surgeons to do in their clinics is to prepare the patients beforehand to get them out of the operating room quicker, and thereby enhancing the flow of patients and having 2 to 3 more patients a day. That was a huge benefit for them. It allowed them to create a new business model, which is actually so successful right now that they're developing the second generation of the Sedation system. And Sedation has become its own franchise within Johnson & Johnson, running its own business there.
I think what's amazing about the story you just told, Yoni, is that the real benefit on an operational level for those surgeons had to be, you'd have to know that as from the point of view as a manufacturer. And it basically means that you really have to know what goes on the other side, where on the customer side. And I imagine that we had some engagements with surgeons here to better understand how they operate their rooms, or else we'd never find out that value, right?
Of course, and in all these sessions, it's really important to bring in the knowledge of all those elements that, as we mentioned, contribute to business model. We have to have all that knowledge. It doesn't mean that we have to deal with all of them. We just have to know how to answer all those questions.
So let's hear some 2 more examples of business model innovation that stem not from the product, but from different angles, from different starting points. Idea. So we're in South America, and this is one of Colombia's leading banks, the Vivienda, and they have won an award for the example we were about to show. And this was acknowledged by both the Harvard Business Review and McKinsey, and they won the M Prize for this special platform called DaviPlata. Yoni, tell me a bit about what makes DaviPlata a unique example.
Yeah, well, DaviPlata is really interesting because it started out, as you mentioned, Alon, Vivienda is the #2 bank in Colombia. And they were looking to increase the banked population because Colombia is a country where not everyone can get to banks and not everybody wants to be part of the banking world. So what they were really looking to accomplish is how do we get the unbanked into the banking system and monetize that huge population that don't have accounts right now, don't have bank accounts right now. And so the challenge really began from that perspective. How do we get unbanked people into our bank?
So I understand that the angle that was they decided to focus on was the mobile channel, because the mobile penetration was much higher than any other, credit cards or as you mentioned, people did not have bank accounts. And they applied subtraction, exactly the same tool, like you just showed us in Johnson & Johnson, and they applied it to the relevant components in their closed worlds. The branches, the debit card, the forms, signatures and fingerprints, paper. So they made a list basically of all the components, and as the avid SIT users, they were able to challenge themselves, what would the world look like with none of these, right?
Yeah, that was actually really interesting. So if you remember that we talked about the iterative process even within the sedation system, where we subtract one thing at a time and see how they all combine to create a new business model. The same process happened here, but this time it wasn't with the nuts and bolts of a machine, but it was about the resources of a bank.
Yeah, and I applaud the courage of the Derivienne team, because they basically had to go through an exercise which I imagine for many teams in other banks around the world would have sounded, just impossible. How can you create value to unbanked people without all of these components? But basically what they did was they did find a way around it, right? They found a way.
That's right, and they utilized not a crash cart this time, not the screen, but they utilized this the cell phone technology that was so proliferate in Colombia, and they identified ways to provide banking, the entire banking system, through a cell phone, through cell technology, and not through the branches that they used to. So, for example, people were able to do transactions through their cell phone, which I think many of us are able to do nowadays, but that was extremely innovative.
You would normally need a switch, and you'd have to have
an account. And in this case, you don't need an account. They were able to tap into other things to reduce their risk, like the governmental ID, so you don't have to have fingerprints and other things. So they were able to mitigate a lot of risk by opening up that new platform.
And of course, we're giving a very high-level description here, but there is a lot of detail within the article that we just previously showed, and we would be happy to share it. They also changed the language that they used with the customers as well. I'll get to that in a second, but just quickly here, like you can see here, some more attributes of the DaviPlata solution. So people within the system, person to person, can transfer money. If, for example, an employer wanted to provide his unbanked employees, he could use this platform for that. You could pay your bills to your mobile company, electrical company, or withdraw money at an ATM by receiving to your mobile.
A virtual wallet in your cell phone.
Incredible. And of course, I guess the main innovation here was the risk model that they used to obviously overcome the challenges of having anonymous, basically without a face-to-face interaction through a branch with no forms, having access to people and still being able to manage or balance the risks of anonymity with financial transactions.
And finding the benefits of people who have proactively searched for ways not to become part of the banking industry and really provide value for all of those stakeholders.
And here as well, I was saying earlier on about the language that they've changed. So they said, what would happen if we didn't use the standard banking language, which I imagine for many people is really daunting and sounds very frightening because it sounds very professional. So instead of withdrawal, they said take out money. Instead of transaction, pass money to. Balance, how much money do I have? So really simplifying the language and enabling more people to connect to these services. Well, for dessert, will you let me finish with the last?
Go ahead.
Okay.
With all this coffee,
I know. Chocolate's been mentioned once in this webinar. It's about time we mentioned it once more. This example is from a chocolate brand in Switzerland that belongs to Nestle called Cahier. And what Cahier did was astounding. They decided what would happen if in our business model as a chocolate manufacturer we would subtract the retailer. Meaning that if you're going to go and buy your wife a box of chocolates, you can go to the retailer, to the supermarket, and buy that chocolate. And the solution, or the way that they were able to find a way around this, because obviously you can imagine that there are many benefits. The margins are much better, and you have a direct connection with the consumer. They decided to create a direct channel, meaning there's an online website where you can order chocolate for your loved ones, and you interact directly with the brand and with the product and with the packaging as well, with no intermediate, the person in the middle, right?
That's really interesting. I never thought of buying a consumer good directly from the manufacturer.
Well, there you go. I mean, you
go to the supermarket.
I know, but when you go to the supermarket, think about it. That box of chocolate is on the same shelf with all its competitors. When you go to the website, you're immersed in the world of this brand, and you'll never think of the competitor. Now, what was interesting about the work that we did with the Nestle a few years ago, this was I think 2009, and this was launched last year, is that they said if we're already interacting with the consumer, let's create a different experience than the retail experience. Let's not just transfer the retail experience onto an online channel. That's great, but that's not enough. Let's add some value or create a new experience. And what they developed was a personalized questionnaire where you get a box of these chocolates, you taste them, and then you rate which you liked and which you disliked, and then they create a chocolate profile. So it's either for you if you're the consumer or for the person you're sending a box of chocolates to. And then what Cahiers do, they send you the chocolates that you like according to your chocolate profile. So again, it's in line with trends we know around the world of customization and personalization. But basically, this is, as far as I know, first to the world direct channel for chocolate that encompasses all of this emotion. If you think about it, this is a very emotional category, unlike Sedation machine. And of course, they put so much emotion into all of these elements of this new.
I think that's really interesting because rather than just taking out the intermediary and creating better margins for themselves and being greedy about it,
right,
they actually invested money back into it to create a completely different experience. They give you some chocolate for free as a test box.
Yeah.
They create a profile for you.
Sure.
That required some money, and I think that they got that money to invest by skipping the retailer.
Yeah, and of course there was a lot of buzz around this new model, which really is very new in chocolate. And by the way, I think in retail or manufacturers in general, direct channels is a very tricky area, and finding a way not to just, like I said, duplicate the retail experience, but create something new. That's one of the biggest challenges we're hearing from our customers. So Yoni, this was fun, but it's time to summarize. We promised our guests that it would be 45 minutes, so with your permission, we'll have 3 more minutes, and then we'll have to say goodbye. So let's try and connect the 2 parts of the webinar. At the beginning, we spoke about the closed world of any business model, which is basically these items on the left-hand side in red fonts, which are, I would say, the generic buckets that you can fill for any business model. What makes the difference between each business model will be what's inside those buckets. So as our listeners are reviewing this list, they obviously each have a separate value proposition, different relationships with customers, different segments, and so on and so forth. But these titles are basically characterizing any business model. What we would like you to do and encourage you to do is try and take elements from within these buckets, for example, your customer segments, and put them into this workflow, into the function follows workflow, and try to manipulate it. For example, if I were going to apply subtraction, which is, you've seen it in many of these examples, you should be able to use it now on your own. Try imagining what your business model what would happen to it if we subtracted your most valued and substantial customer segment. Imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and that segment was not purchasing products or services from your company, and you were left with all the other segments. And the questions would be, what would be the benefits of this new manipulated situation, and how would you overcome, or what would be the challenges that you'd have to overcome in this brand new situation? Now just remember, it's not about doing exactly what you're doing today without that segment. It's now creating adaptations to all the other elements, perhaps to your channels, perhaps to your resources, perhaps to your cost structure, but trying to shift all of these elements to make a business model that makes sense without that key segment. Imagine taking away one of your key channels, or your pricing models, or subtracting one of your key products. All of these elements, all of these triggers are supposed to push you and your peers in new directions, and now you know that there is a flow that you can follow step by step that will lead you into these new directions. So we hope we've given you an appetizer for the world of business model innovation. And we hope that this has created a bit more substance and a more concrete starting point for you to begin with and explore, but at the end of the day, it is an exploration, and you need to practice and just try it out and find out for yourself where this leads you to. We are leaving you with an email address of Adi, our marketing associate, who will be happy to collect all your comments and feedbacks and pass them on to Yoni and myself. And thank you for taking the time for being with us here today. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you in future webinars. Yoni, thanks so much for being an excellent partner, and
thanks, Alon, and thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.